My name is Erik Van Horn. I bought my first franchise in my 20s, and since then, I've owned 6 brands with 25 stores in 8 states. I've also helped 1,000 people find the right franchise for them. People like us who are not cut out for the 9 to 5 and like to work smarter, not harder. How do we find the right franchise, buy it, grow it, sell it, and how do we do it in a way to own the business without it owning us? Those are the questions, and I'm on a mission to give you the answers. Welcome to Franchise Secrets. Welcome to the Franchise Secrets podcast. Erik here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about my network, how I grew my network, specifically like who in my network I got to know, how I got to know them, mistakes I made along the way. And as I've been reflecting on this, it reminded me this was my mindset early on, and really the reason how I got involved in franchising to begin with. So I want to go back to that first time in franchising where I met my mentor and he taught me how to sell franchises, to the biggest mistake that I made when in a Rolls Royce with Frank Kern, who was teaching me some things about marketing, how I got to know Bedros Keuilian, how we got to the point where we started a mastermind together. Also, Kevin Harrington, he's somebody that I've gotten to know more recently. We're not friends, but I've gotten to know him where he's doing something for me that I would have never in a million years been able to ask him to do and him to say yes if we hadn't gotten to know each other a bit. Cameron Harold, he wrote a lot of different books. Meetings Suck is one of my favorites, and Free PR. He was the COO of 1-800-GOT-JUNK with Brian Scudamore, and he's become a friend over the years and has taught me some critical things that like every month I seem to take some nuggets that he's given me over the years and implement it into my life, to being able to get Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Poor Dad, on my podcast. It would have never happened if it wasn't for my network. So I want to go back to the beginning with you guys to let you know how this average kid from South Dakota moved out of this small town of 9,000 people and got started in franchising. And I'm going to tell you about the names I just mentioned, but I'm going to start with John Hewitt. He's the guy, the founder of Jackson Hewitt and Liberty Tax, and he's going on to do other things within franchising. But it was 17 years ago when I was first introduced to him. I had a friend that was starting to look at franchises, and I was young, didn't have a lot of money. And my friend said, "Hey, we're looking at this franchise and we are going to meet with some of the franchisees and learn about this brand." Little did I know we were actually going to the convention. It was like their annual convention. And any of you in franchising know that that's usually a big deal. And other franchisees, outsiders, are usually not allowed in at the convention. Well, somehow we were in at that convention and I got to know some different people at the Liberty Tax corporate offices and some franchisees. And long story short, I flipped a house, got some money, bought my first franchise with this intention. And I don't think I've ever really shared this part of my story before. So even before I started as a franchisee, I don't remember if I got paid or I was just volunteering at the corporate office to learn about selling franchises. And I did it because I was positioning myself to be on the sales team, the franchise development team, once this first tax season was over, which was in April. Come May, there's nothing else to do in the tax business. And I wanted to sell franchises. And it wasn't that I really wanted to sell franchises. I wanted to learn from John Hewitt, this guy who had grown Jackson Hewitt to many franchises and then was doing the same thing at Liberty Tax at that point. And here's the thing that I knew, and this is the number one reason why I pursued that. I knew John Hewitt would spend 1 hour a day at 4 o'clock, bring in all of the franchise development people into the conference room, and they would learn how to sell franchises. We would get blasted for saying stupid things, wrong things, incorrect things. It's like not the best way to lead people through a proven process to take someone that doesn't know anything about a brand to becoming a franchisee. And I wanted to spend time in that conference room with these development representatives who had been doing it for years, and then with John Hewitt, who was coaching everybody at the same time. And so that's exactly what I did. I don't remember again if I was paid or volunteered before I was a franchisee, but then I was a franchisee, finished up the first tax season in Kansas City, was where I opened up my first tax office. Then I went in back to Virginia Beach and I was on the sales team. And I remember being in meetings with John and the other sales reps who I'm still really good friends with so many of them today. And I was on the phone a couple months ago with John Hewitt. So these people become your friends. If you do things the right way, your network is your network of new friends. And so I was remembering back to those meetings and how I wanted to put myself out there to get told how wrong I was doing things so I could get feedback and do things better. And when I say feedback, that's a very nice way to say I got slammed, I got hammered, I got made fun of, but I knew that's what was going to make me better. So I was just thinking about that today as I knew I was going to be talking about growing our network. And that was the first time that I got to spend time 1 hour a day, 5 days a week with someone that was at a completely different level than me. And I did it. I went to work for him. And really, that's where I got my start in franchising and really where I'm an expert today. One of the areas is franchise development. I learned so much from John. I went on to develop sales processes and systems for other franchisors and put those in place and help them sell franchises. And then I went on to the consulting side of the world and helped a lot of people become franchisees as a consultant. So I really got my start there. Now, I want to shift gears. That's where I got my start. I want to bring us to the last probably 3 to 4 years of my life where I was at the top of my game in the franchise consulting world. I was the one that with a handful of others that people would go to learn from, to sit and ask us questions and to gain insight. And whenever you get to that point, well, at least for me, whenever I get to the point where I'm at the top of my game in whatever it is, for me, it was just franchise consulting. I felt uncomfortable because I was really comfortable. And it feels good when people are coming to you and you have a lot of the answers. But what doesn't feel good, there's no place to go because you're at the top of your game. And you know deep down that there are people that are doing so many things bigger and better than you outside of your little world. And so I pushed myself. I wanted to become really good at marketing and building a brand around franchising. That's where I love franchising came into play. That's where franchise secrets came into play. And there that is where we're going now with Franchise Tribe, where we are bringing a community of franchisees together so we can help each other. And I'll bring in experts to help them. We'll be doing a lot of different trainings inside this mastermind called Franchise Tribe. If you want to check it out, it's zetribemastermind.com, ZEE tribemastermind.com. But the reason I started to push myself to talk to people like Frank Kern, who is a genius in the digital marketing world, is because I knew that he could take me to a place that I've never been before. And he could teach me things that I didn't even know how to do, didn't even know existed, and just introduce me to a whole new world. Now, I went to work for John Hewitt. He paid me to work for him, where I got an hour a day of his time in a group coaching session. Frank, I didn't go to work for him. I paid him a lot of money for a few meetings over a 1 year period where there'd be a group of 10 of us that would go in and spend a 2 days with him at his office and his team, and he would help us with whatever it is that we needed help with. Usually it was around marketing and branding and bringing people into our ecosystem and helping them out. Frank's genius was just basically to focus on one thing and do that and don't try a bunch of fancy new stuff. So take what's working and do more of that. That's a very simple way to say it. But here's a point that I want to make with Frank Kern. I remember going out to this fancy dinner with me, Frank, and a couple other people, and we were coming back and going to the office, and I was in Frank's Rolls Royce, a really nice Rolls Royce. We don't have those in South Dakota, by the way. So I was in this car that I've never been in before, and Frank was in the back seat, and I was in the other on the other side in this Rolls Royce, beautiful car, which has a driver because you just don't have a Rolls Royce without having a driver. So the driver was driving us. It was me and Frank, and then this other guy, I don't even remember his name, what he looked like, or anything about him, but he was in the front seat. Harder to talk to Frank. And I was in the back seat. And I made a critical mistake that I will never make again. And that is not saying anything, not having a really good question to ask, not having anything of value to give, because I didn't have that question to spark a conversation to lead to me getting value from Frank because I was there to get value out of him. But the guy in the front seat did. And what he did is he asked Frank one good question. I don't even know what the question was, but I do know what happened next. He and Frank talked for the next 30 minutes, all the way back. And I was just thinking, why in the world did I not have one really good question to ask, one really smart person that I had their time and attention with for the next 30 minutes? And I look back and I'm not glad I made that mistake, but it is a mistake that I will always remember. So I've taken that with me, even with Bedros, who I'm going to talk about next. There are things that I learned from Frank and vowing that I would never let that slip by me again. And I haven't. And I've been telling other people about that little story as well. But Frank's a guy that, I can email him or text him if I need something now because I was a paying client of his at one point. And guys, here's something else to just take away. Sometimes you just have to pay money to get access to certain people, to certain groups, and that is okay. And that's another thing that I learned from Frank. I paid money to get access to him, and I got that access, and I still have some of that access when I'm not actively paying him. Here's the other thing that I learned. I have friends today, I have friends today from my meeting with Frank, people that I got to know there that are my friends today. And I was just texting some of them last week. And so once you pay to get into a certain circle, and Frank's has an inner circle thing, once you pay to get in, and then you start building relationships, not just with the guru or the leader or the thought leader, but you put yourself out to learn from others and talk to others and make yourself interesting to others, then all of a sudden your network begins to grow even more. So that is Frank Kern. I'm going to shift again to Bedros Keuilian. It was about a year and a half ago. I was at a conference in Salt Lake City, in Park City, actually, because we were skiing, and Bedros was the keynote. Now, I knew about Bedros because I've seen him online. I knew he was a franchise guy. He owns Fit Body Bootcamp. He's a founder of that. And I know he's an online influencer and just a leader. He loves leadership, oozes leadership, and talks about leadership and digital marketing and social and is just, incredibly smart with all of that stuff. And I wanted to get to know Bedros. And so he gave this keynote. I went up after he was done with his keynote. There was a small line, and I knew I had about 10 seconds to get his attention. Just like with Frank, I had a small window of time to ask Frank a really good question or make some type of impact. So here I was with Bedros, and I just, I thanked him and I did all that. But I asked him a question. I said, would you be on my podcast? I got a podcast for franchisees and people that want to buy franchises. Could I have you on as a guest? And then he said something next, which I wasn't expecting. And it wasn't a good question from my perspective because of the answer that I had to give. He said, how many people do you have? How big is your audience? And I knew immediately as he asked that, I had a chance to be super authentic and honest and give him the real answer, or to fudge the numbers and let him know it's bigger than what it really is. So I had a split second to make that decision. I said, it is small but mighty. The people that listen to the Franchise Secrets podcast reach out to me. I hear from them, and it is a very good group of franchisees and people that are looking at buying franchises. So he said, "Great." He's like, "But I don't do Zoom calls." Guys, he said, "I don't do Zoom calls." And I've had him on Zoom multiple times over the last year. But he said, "I don't do Zoom calls. If you come to California, we will record in my studio." So I said, "Great." He said, "Reach out to my assistant and we'll get it set up." And then here's what I did next. And again, I don't think I've told this to anybody either. I knew she was at going to be at this dinner. His assistant was going to be at this dinner that evening. And so what I went to her and I started asking her, I have a chance. I might be able to have Bedros on my podcast. I will come to his studio to record. What do I need to know about Bedros that I don't know today? How can I add value to him? How can I help him? How can I not look like an idiot and get 30 minutes of his time on a podcast? And she started giving me all of this insight. Here's what he likes, here's what he doesn't like. And so I followed up with an email saying I'd love to have him on my podcast. And basically, when is a good time? Long story short, we booked it. I flew out to California just for that podcast. I flew out to California with my wife just for that one thing, a podcast with Bedros, because I wanted to get to know him. And so I had a great time with my wife because we took it as an opportunity to have a little vacation away from the kids for a while. We went there, we had a fantastic time, and then it came time to go do the podcast. We drove to the studio. And I remember, like yesterday, I told my wife, Magdalena, I said, I don't know what's going to come out of this. It'll be interesting to see, but I have no clue where this goes, if anywhere. We go in and it's a beautiful studio. And then they started asking me, how do you like this, Erik? How do you like that? The camera here and this, that, and the other. And I said, this is my first time recording a podcast in a studio. I'm new. You teach me. And they're like, oh, no worries. And they started to help me and coach me and teach me and whatnot. And they gave me a piece of advice that, guys, if I hadn't been honest and like real humble, just like honestly saying this is my first time, I wouldn't have gotten the tip that they said, put a whiteboard by the camera on your left side and put down your 5 bullet points or key questions or this, that, and the other of where you want the interview to go. And so I'm like, this is great. So I did that and I still do it today. So I learned that little tip, did the interview, and it was partway through that interview that Bedros realized that I wasn't just a normal person asking somebody questions. Like I had an interest in him. At the end of that, it's like, hey, I want to get to know you more. Here's my cell phone. Let's stay in touch. It was a few months later we reached out to each other because he needed some help with something. I gave him some help with the thing that he needed. He's like, wow, I didn't even know that. And then he helped me with some things that I needed. A year later, we met up at a different conference. He happened to be there. I'm like, hey man, you're gonna be there? He's like, yeah, I'm speaking at this conference. And we ended up going out to coffee because he asked me, we wanted to go have some coffee. And that's where we started to talk about some of the things that we were going to work on together in a future joint venture partnership together. But this is the point. That would have never happened if I hadn't gotten in line to go thank him. And that was my purpose, to thank him and to ask him to be on my podcast. And it's so easy for me to not get in line because I don't want to be seen as a guy that wants to get in line to go tell somebody thank you. And I'd missed it with Frank. I wasn't going to miss it with Bedros. I did it, and we're friends today. And I'll tell you what, he's helped my friends. I'll have friends that I've introduced to Bedros, and he is the kindest, most helpful guy. And so you just never know where things are going to go. And that's the point of this. I've had people that I've met like this that it didn't go anywhere. And that's okay. I'm not trying to be friends with everybody that I meet, but I'm wanting to ask a good question to open up a door to see where it goes. And that's the purpose. And that's my big takeaway with my conversation with Bedros. Ask a good question, open up the door, and see where that goes, if anywhere, or when it actually goes somewhere. But Bedros is a friend now. I appreciate him so much. He's helped me out in so many ways, and I hope I've helped him out half as much as he's helped me out. Okay. I want to talk about somebody that I just met during COVID, and that's Kevin Harrington, the original shark from Shark Tank. So, a mutual friend helped me get him on my podcast. I had him on the podcast about this is funny. The first time that he was on the podcast and it was him, or I think it was he was having internet troubles. We would go and then it would stop. We would go and it would stop. And it was shaping up to be the worst podcast ever. I mean, just an absolute disaster of a podcast. And so I had Kevin dropping out of Zoom, coming back on, trying to start where we left off. And if you know about recording a podcast, that is not a fun way to do it. It's a disaster for your editor and it just doesn't flow very well. And here's what Kevin said: Erik, why don't we just reschedule? And I was like, great. And so we rescheduled and he came on and we had a fantastic time. I was ready. We talked about all kinds of stuff and turned off the podcast, hit the record button. So it turned off. And he said, we should get to know each other. And let me introduce you to my franchise team. He introduced me to Jimmy and Marty, and then we had probably weekly calls for a couple months just talking and strategizing about stuff. I never once asked to reach out to Kevin or say something to Kevin or anything like that. But Kevin knew that I was helping his team and I wasn't helping them because Kevin was on my podcast. I was helping them because I liked them and they were helping me with things, Jimmy and Marty, part of Kevin Harrington's crew. So fast forward to about a month ago, I'm working on putting together a an event in 2021. And I said, gosh, I would love to have Kevin keynote this thing along with a couple of others. I'd love to have him keynote this. And so what I did is I sent a text to Brian, who is Kevin's son. I said, hey, I'm looking at doing this event for franchisees. I'd love Kevin to be the keynote speaker. And then we ended up talking for a while. And then, and again, he was asking me questions like, send me the website, send me the itinerary, send me all the stuff. And I said, man, we don't have any of that. This is idea. Right. This is like idea stage right now, but this will happen. And we do want Kevin there and we will work around his schedule. And so he said, bullet point it out, send it to me, and I'll see what I can do. And I said, do you think Kevin will actually do this for us? He said, yeah, I think Kevin would love to do this for you, Erik. And so it was a couple weeks later. Kevin said, thumbs up. We got the date booked. You guys all be hearing about this later. But if you're a franchisee, you're not going to want to miss this event. It'll happen sometime early 2021. But Kevin's going to keynote it. And then Brian, here's the other thing. Brian said, hey, Kevin's coming out with a new book. It's basically a book on like mentoring relationships, which I love. And so I said, would you want to buy any? So of course I did. I bought 100 of them right from the publisher. And guys, this is what is helpful to an author like Kevin. Now, my 100 book purchase from Kevin is not going to make or break him as an author. It's not going to like put a bunch of money into his bank account. It's not going to be the difference between being a bestseller and not being a bestseller. But what it does do is it shows Kevin and Brian, Erik is in it. Erik is playing the game. Erik is not just wanting to take, Erik's wanting to give. And that is a key thing. Be the person that gives. Guys, I gave to people on his team. I helped them out with things. And I wasn't doing it to get something. I was doing it to add value and give. And then all of a sudden, we needed a keynote speaker like a Kevin Harrington. And he said yes. So always be the one that gives value. Don't be the one that is always just trying to take and take and take from people, because that is not the way to network. That is not the way to build relationships. And that's not being, it's just not being a good person. You're always taking from people. Let me tell you about somebody else, Cameron Harold. Cameron's the founder of the COO Alliance, where he helps COOs, and a lot of companies pay him a lot of money to help them with operations. He's an author, fantastic author of many different books, and he's just a brilliant business mind. And we got to know each other at some mastermind. I reached out to him because he commented on somebody's post on social. So he commented on one of my friend's posts. I commented back to him. He commented it back, and I don't even remember what it was, but it wasn't just a stupid post. It was something where I added some value, and he responded back, because that's how Cameron is on social. He'll respond back, and whether it's me or somebody else, that's who he is. So anyway, I ended up getting him on my podcast. And through that, at the end of that, is like, hey, Erik, if you ever need any help on anything, just book 30 minutes of my time and I'll help you out with some of this stuff. Because one of the key takeaways from my podcast with Cameron, he said, if you don't have an assistant, an executive assistant, then you are an executive assistant. And I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say, Erik, that one thing Cameron said forced me to get an executive assistant. And it did for me. I hired an executive assistant. I said, Cameron, I have my executive assistant now. I would love to have that 30-minute time block. And he just poured into me. But one of my questions is, why did you give me 30 minutes of your time? And I wasn't asking that just because I was just grateful that I was one of them. I wanted to learn from him his mindset on why he would open up a calendar to somebody like me that wasn't a paying client, because I wanted to learn how to do that for other people, because my calendar, a lot of people are always trying to get on my calendar, and I can't talk to most of them. Like most of the people that want to get on my calendar, I can't talk to people. My consulting rate's $5,000 for a 4-hour block, and a lot of people that want to get my calendar aren't wanting to pay that. So he gave me some just incredible insight on why he opens up his calendar, and it's to the right people. And there's not a return, like a monetary return. He's not expecting me to become a paying client, but he can always extract value out of that. And no matter where you are, how smart you want to be the person that gives of your time to other people. And it's because of that conversation with Cameron that I've opened up my calendar to take on different people that just need help. And I make that a practice in my calendar to be able to do that. Now, Cameron's come on to and has helped many of you just inside the franchise tribe and the franchise tribe Facebook group. He came on like, Cameron, it's COVID. People need help. Can you help them? And he came on and just gave and gave and gave. He's a guy that I'll go to, I'll message, I'll text and say, Cameron, give me some insight as a speaker. How should I respond this way when I'm wanting to bring on talent and speakers into the mastermind, the franchise tribe mastermind, or I'm wanting to understand how things work from that side of things? He will give perspective on that. But guys, Cameron is an amazing man. And I'm so glad that I reached out to him on a social post that anybody can do. All of you out there can talk to somebody on social. And you just have to put yourself out there and ask really good questions, give good answers, and just don't be like a fan. Just don't be that fanboy, that fangirl thinking, this is the guru. I just want to tell them how awesome they are. They're just human like you are. Which brings me to the last one, which is Robert Kiyosaki. Now, Robert is someone that now Robert's the like did the cash flow game, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He's the reason I got into franchising in the first place. He's the one that changed my mindset when it comes to business. And so I owe Robert a lot for how he has helped me in my entrepreneurial journey. But it took a lot to get him on my podcast, a lot. But it's a friend that helped me, two friends that helped me get 3 friends actually. I'm just their names keep popping in, but one friend in particular, Josh Felber, helped me get him on my podcast. And Josh has become a good friend. And he just called me this morning. He's a guy that I met at a mastermind that I pay $30,000 a year to be on and or to be in. And he's was a friend from that mastermind. Guys, masterminds are a fantastic way to grow your network, whether it's the franchise tribe mastermind that I have or a million other different masterminds out there. That is a way to grow your network. So, anyway, Robert came from that. And then I had another friend, Zach, who's an Instagram guy. And he's another guy that I met at a different mastermind called 100 Million Mastermind Experience. And he was on Robert's podcast. Robert was on his podcast. And then Chandler Bolt, another friend of mine, all were able to help me get Robert Kiyosaki on the podcast. Now, I don't have any amazing story once Robert was on. I tried because at the end of the podcast, I'm like, hey, Robert, that was a crazy, crazy good podcast. And he's funny. We had some really good conversations before and after the podcast. But I said to him, if there's ever any need that you or anybody on your team has to get some insight into the franchise world that you may not have access to or you don't know about or you want introduced to somebody, just let me know. Guys, I just put it out there and I haven't heard anything from him. Nothing will probably ever come of it. But the point of that is I get this incredible guy on my podcast. We have a fantastic interview. And I'm sure I could reach out to him again for something else if I needed to. It's not going to be the normal channels, but nothing happened out of that. A relationship didn't develop out of that. And that's okay. But I feel good because I put it out there. I'd be disappointed if I hadn't said, if you ever need anything in the franchising world, reach out to me. And I didn't just leave it at that because I said, or anybody on your team, because I'm not trying to talk to Robert again. I am just wanting to add value. Another way to say that question, hey, Robert, if there's anything that I can ever do that can add value in my little area of expertise called franchising, let me know and I'll help anybody from the biggest to the smallest player on your team. I will help them. And that's the attitude that we all should have when we are networking and meeting new people. You need to be humble. You need to be honest. You can't fear rejection because you will get rejected. You can't be desperate, but you need to be looking for opportunities to help others. Don't just look at how people can help you, but how can you help others? And a little bit more about Kevin Harrington. There's multiple different ways that I can help Kevin right now. And I just mentioned the other day one to Brian, like, hey, I can actually help Kevin with this other thing as well. Again, I don't get anything out of it, but it's just purely to help. And don't be fake humble. Don't be, you all know what fake humble is. And just be real, be authentic, ask really good, thoughtful questions, add value. And here's the other thing with around adding value. You just have to look at the way that you can really add value to somebody because there's a lot of ways that I don't think I could really add value to somebody. And then as I start to think about it, give it some thought and really, work on it for a month. How can you add value? If I need to get Gary V on my podcast, how could I help him? I know actually just that his name popped into my mind. And as I was talking to somebody the other day that's starting to work with him in franchising. So I know that I could help Gary add some value in the world of franchising to Gary. But if I hadn't had that conversation with that friend, I would take a month and just think about it every day. Like, how could I add value to this guy? And then you start adding value to people. Here's the other thing, don't look at things just from your perspective, look at it from their perspective. And that just takes you out of your own mind and your own selfishness. And it just puts yourself into their shoes. That is probably those are some of the people that I've gotten to know in my network. Some of them I did it online. Some of them were from an event that I went to. Some of them were from masterminds that I paid to be a part of. And some of them were coaches that I paid to coach me. Now they're all, except for Robert Kiyosaki, are part of my circle, people that I can reach out to. And I tell you what, it really is about who you know and not what you know. I look at this list in front of me, the people that I talked about, and they can open up doors for me way more than anything that I know, more than any degree that I have. They will be able to open up doors, give me opportunity that is just unimaginable if I needed it. And I hope to be that for other people. And that's the goal of the mastermind. I want to be that for other people because people have been that for me. And I know that I am just getting started in this world of networking. So I hope that helps you understand a little bit more about how I network, my attitude, my mindset around it. And maybe we'll meet one of these days. If you please leave a review, give it a 5-star review if you like this podcast, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Franchise Secrets Podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, please make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to whatever channel you're listening on. If you want my help with anything from buying a franchise to franchising your business, please visit franchisesecrets.com.